This episode of Primitive Culture is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the non-profit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org.
This is Tim Russ, Lieutenant Commander Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Open your mind to the past. Oh, this may mean something.
It's a primitive culture. I'm just trying to blend in.
Some people think the future means the end of history. Well, we haven't run out of history quite yet.
Hello and welcome to Primitive Culture, a Trek FM podcast all about our history, our culture and how Star Trek relates to it. I'm Duncan Barrett, and joining me today we have a very special guest. It's Chris Nunn, a lecturer in film and TV at Greenwich University in London, and we're actually recording at the university as well. Hi Chris.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for hosting us here. It's part of our Primitive Culture tour of the higher education institutions of London. We've been to LSE, now we're at Goldsmiths. No, sorry. I was at Goldsmiths earlier tonight. Now we're at Greenwich. Big mistake there.
That's fine, yeah. There's no rivalry at all between the two.
Goldsmiths will have to be somewhere along the line.
Sure.
But anyway, thank you for having us. And the reason I was keen to get you on for this episode is the topic that we're discussing today is a film topic, and it's about basically the cinematic influences on First Contact. And when I asked you to come on this show, I had this idea at the back of my mind for a while. I knew I'd read this somewhere, and then you agreed to come on the show, and then I was looking around, I couldn't find this interview, and in the end it was actually Dr. Trek, Larry Nemeczek, who helped me out, because I contacted him and I said, I'm sure I read this interview with Jonathan Frakes where he talked about the films that he watched when he was preparing to direct First Contact. I just can't find it anywhere. And anyway, Larry told me, go and look up the making of book for First Contact, which I had in my bedroom back in the 90s and haven't looked at since. And sure enough, there I found on the page, I'm just going to read this section because I think it will hopefully set up the discussion that we can have. So it says, in preparation, Frakes studied the work of several genre masters, viewing such great films as Alien, Aliens, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Blade Runner and Jaws. I looked at all the good ones, he says. I was always told steal from the good ones if you can. I think those are the films that audiences loved because they combined action with storytelling, and that's what I'm hoping we did with this one. And then it goes on and says, of all the films, Jaws seems the most interesting choice, having little to do with invading aliens or outer space. Frakes says he selected that film because the implied threat of the shark is what I'm hoping to do with the Borg. There's an implied threat before we actually see them. I thought the way Spielberg developed that in Jaws was wonderful, where a lot of it is played in reactions and with sound. It was a very good jumping off point. Whenever you reveal a villain, you want to make sure the audience and the characters are scared first so that the build-up and the tension are there. So maybe we could start off talking a little bit about Jaws and the way that film might have influenced Frakes' work.
Yes, that makes it makes a lot of sense. The famously the shark doesn't really appear, and that really was Spielberg's trick to actually creating tension. Especially, of course, that infamous scene right at the opening. Well, it's all shot point of view, and so we don't see the shark. We just see what the shark sees, and then everyone's thinking, "Well, oh my God, what's going on?" And I suppose in a way you're confusing the audience, by immersing them in this space. And I think that you can see that a lot in what he does in First Contact. Certainly those early, the Borg don't appear. You don't see your first drone for about 40 minutes, apart from obviously the nightmare sequence with Picard at the opening. So you don't see your first Borg drone for about 40 minutes. As the crews start getting assimilated, it's getting hot in engineering, they realise something's going on. It's all shot point of view. So you either have the characters looking around, or you have a Borg drone looking at them. Lots of shadows, which I tend to imagine he actually took from Alien, but we'll get there in a second.
I was going to say the first sort of hint of a Borg that we see is a very Alien-like shot. It's just a shadow.
Absolutely, yeah.
Very un-Borgy, because it looks quite fast. It looks quite... it doesn't look like what you'd associate with the Borg at all, but it's very much that idea of a kind of unseen threat.
Totally. And I think Again, what we've seen of the Borg so far, there's a couple of things to say, I suppose. One of them is that they had to update it a little bit to be, I suppose, for the big screen. Like, all of a sudden you've got audiences in a cinema. It's a very different environment to audiences at home on TV. And I think that they made a creative choice in there somewhere. The Borg are still a bit bulky and slow to move in parts of the film, but actually they're a bit more threatening and a little bit faster. But I put that down to a difference in kind of what you need to do for cinema versus what you need to do for TV.
They're more physically intimidating, I think, as well, aren't they? I mean, on Next Gen, the threat from the Borg was more their sort of the number of them and their kind of implacability, I suppose. Whereas the Borg in First Contact, you get more of this kind of hand-to-hand fighting. You get more of this kind of the idea that they seem very strong. They seem very physically kind of imposing in a way.
Yeah, definitely. There is that. And of course, they've updated the whole look, which then actually, I suppose, influenced hugely the way that Voyager's aesthetic of the Borg was taken on.
Yeah.
And there were arguments, actually. I was reading something today from one of the production designers. I can't remember his name. There were arguments about Picard's suit in the dream sequence.
Yeah.
And the studio didn't want to pay for a new one, so said just use the one from the television show. And then the designer was like, I can't do that because this was designed for sort of TV 4:3, and now I'm shooting on film, and I'm on a wide screen, and it's just going to look awful. So there is a tale about how he cobbled then together the new suit for Picard.
It's interesting. I heard recently that there are actually only something like 7 or 8 Borg in that film. There are only that many costumes, and that's why you never see more than that number at a time.
Yeah.
But the way it's edited and the way it's done, it gives the impression that they're everywhere, and there are loads of them. It's very cleverly done. I think that reusing of actually quite a limited resource in terms of costuming.
Totally. And actually, I suppose to move the discussion on ever so slightly to talk about kind of resourcing in Alien. Well, here we have the Alien has about 4 minutes of screen time in a 2-hour film. So while they did design famously that elaborate costume, and that was done by H.R. Geiger, and there was a man who played the alien, God knows what that was like. But, so while you had all of that, it was a real economy of screen time. And again, you could say the same of Spielberg and Jaws, a real economy of actually, by the time you do see the shark later on in the film and it's actually eating the boat, and you think, well, yes, it does look very real, and the threat is real at that point, but God, it was better when it wasn't there.
Yeah. And this was born out of necessity, right? Because they were having trouble with the shark. I think the animatronics weren't working, and there were all these kind of issues. And as a result, I mean, as you see so often with TV and film, when limitations are placed on you, sometimes it generates more creative solutions in a way. And so with Jaws, basically they conjure the shark with, like you say, with point of view storytelling and with that musical score, which is such a big part of it.
Absolutely.
And I wonder whether partly it's also just that you're putting the imagination of the audience to work, in a sense. The less you show them, the more they kind of build it up in their head. Whereas actually, the shark model in Jaws is not as terrifying as the shark that you've imagined up to that point. I mean, it's not kind of disjunctive with it. You don't think, oh, that's not what I've been thinking. But at the same time, you've already imbued it with so much kind of power and so much terror by that point that it kind of, I suppose, like Frakes was saying in that quote, it kind of enters with this kind of build-up. And I mean, you were saying we don't see the Borg for a long time. We particularly don't see the Borg Queen, I think, until about an hour into the film.
Yeah, that's correct.
Halfway through, more than halfway.
You hear her first. And she's speaking, and then there's obviously again a bit of mystery around that. I think there's a really interesting shot in that sequence where you get a shot of the wires at the top that then that's where she's going to come from in the end, but we don't know that at that point. So you just get this shot of the pipes kind of moving, and Data obviously speaking to someone, but we don't know who that is or what that is. And obviously again building a bit of mystery around that and letting the audience do a bit of work. And it's then, it's about reactions.
Similarly, with the Borg, I suppose you get, I'm thinking of that scene in sickbay when they're evacuating the sickbay. And, that is probably the first scene where the Borg are literally in the scene. And yet, again, we don't see them. And that has got to be a creative choice on Frakes' part. That's got to be because that is quite a bold directorial decision in a way to have it. If you look at sort of what happens in this scene? The Borg break into sickbay, but by the time they get there, they're on the way out, and the Doctor has to stall them, and so on. But we literally, even at the very end, we see the door getting dented from the other side, and then we just see a reaction on Robert Picardo's face, and we never cut back to see what he's looking at, even throughout that entire scene. And yet somehow it works, and even it works. Robert Picardo is able to sell it even as someone who is not terrified of the Borg, because he has that sort of mixture of, he has a kind of degree of horror on his face and sort of revulsion, even though he's not actually threatened by them the way that, an organic being would be.
Yeah, no, completely. And it is that. So you've got the two crewmen who are assimilated at the beginning. We hear one of those is off screen. The other one is a point of view shot from the point of view of a Borg drone racing towards her. Again, her reaction is what is selling us on how scary this is. And again with Picardo and the EMH, only him, as opposed to seeing a horde of drones come through the door.
And that woman who's attacked in the Jeffries tube, that is very much, to me, from watching Jaws, that's the most Jaws-like moment in First Contact, because there's this concept, isn't there, of the Spielberg face that he uses in his films, that of exactly what we're talking about, I suppose, of focusing on the reaction rather than the thing that's being reacted to. So, for example, in Jurassic Park, when they first see the dinosaurs, you have that shot of them in the car, and they pull their sunglasses down and they step up, and often people step towards the camera. There's either a movement towards the camera or the camera moves towards them. And you see that definitely in that shot, that there's basically a sort of fast zooming in on that woman's face as she screams, and then it cuts. Very much like the zoom, the famous one in Jaws, probably the most famous shot in Jaws, where
absolutely
the policeman guy,
Chief Brody
is on the beach, and it zooms in on his kind of horrified reaction. And that definitely is a kind of Spielberg trademark, in a sense, that Frakes has borrowed in this instance.
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. That Chief Brody shot is an absolute classic, and it reminded me, again, of that, and of leaving it up to, again, the audience. It's over to us, really, in this sense, in kind of creating the monster and creating the fear ourselves, which is a really fascinating technique. And again, the Jurassic Park shot is an absolute classic for that as well. What have they just seen? I think it's really interesting.
And it's interesting, I mean, I found once you're sort of aware of that, when you watch Spielberg's films, because we're going to come on to talk about Close Encounters in a minute, you realise how frequently he uses this trick, basically, of showing showing the reaction but not showing the thing that's being reacted to, or possibly showing it afterwards, but basically flipping the order. So more conventionally, you might assume if you're thinking about, like, I'm going to shoot this story and put it on the screen, you shoot the thing and then maybe you shoot the reaction afterwards. But this idea of flipping it round and therefore generating that anticipation is something that he had very much developed and is a kind of signature thing, right?
Yeah, very much so. And yes, you're right. It's conventionally the wrong way round. And of course, not to say really that Spielberg is someone you associate with horror. He is someone you associate with science fiction. And I suppose it's this concept of, because it's not always horrific. I mean, the dinosaur reactions in Jurassic Park are more about the wonder and the spectacle. And Spielberg is very much a director who deals with this idea of spectacle. And one way to capture that is, of course, your characters in the narrative, and what do they make of it? And like you say, that is the wrong way round, but it's a kind of an economic technique in cinema that somehow, I suppose, again, puts the onus on the audience to think, oh, what have they just seen? And that could be a spaceship, it could be an alien, it could be a shark.
Well, also it sets up, I suppose, the character becomes an audience in the film, because they're an audience reacting to the amazing thing before you as an audience react to it, if you see what I mean. So they're almost kind of in the way that, say, you might say Lily Sloan in First Contact is a kind of audience avatar, that very technique is almost creating that kind of like a sort of parallel audience in the film that kind of reacts to everything.
Yes, I agree completely. And it's actually that, we find out things, the audience find things out at the same time as the characters. And so Lily Sloan is, you're right, a fantastic example of a character who's put in there so that we can sit there and think, oh God, how would I react? I've just been beamed up to the Enterprise, oh my God, there's Earth down there, in that scene with the force field. And you think, and then you see a Borg drone for the first time, and that freaks her out big time. And again, we get some nice point of view shots there as well. We do see the drones. we do see them physically, but we also see what they see, which is her bumping into things and screaming.
And
so I think that's very interesting. But it is the idea that not just are we kind of seeing what the reaction to what they're seeing, but sometimes we're on that journey of discovery with the characters as well. Again, Jaws probably isn't one. Alien is a great one where, the crew have no more of an idea what's going on than the audience do for large portions of that film. So you find out with them. And again, that's deployed in First Contact. They're a Borg on the ship. The crew don't know it.
All they know is it's got hotter.
That's it.
Exactly, the kind of environment. And similarly, there's that kind of, we'll come on to talk about Alien in a bit, but, that sense of, Tony and I did an episode a few months ago now about action movie influences in Star Trek, and we were looking at the Alien films and the extent to which in this film it has to be hot so that you can kind of strip Picard down to his vest, and that kind of association of action with kind of almost this sort of gym workout that, everyone gets very hot and sweaty and it's all very kind of bodily and physical somehow.
Yeah, there's
very much the opposite of the kind of clean, hermetically sealed Enterprise, if you know what I mean.
Yes, no, completely. And actually, there are very few, just to be university for a second, there are very few academic texts on action movies as a genre. But one of the most famous one is Yvonne Tasker's Fantastic Bodies. Is it Fantastic Bodies or something like that? But, so very much, it's very much about the physical. And that's something that you don't see often in Star Trek, I don't think. Really, there are other moments in other films that I think get quite physical, but First Contact certainly, let's get Picard in his vest. And actually, doesn't Patrick Stewart look surprisingly buff? And you
can tell he's been working out for quite a while in preparation for that
for
film.
That one scene.
For that one scene at
exactly.
the end. Yeah, definitely. Well, it's interesting. I suppose there is a degree of kind of gore and squelchiness in First Contact. I'm thinking about the scene where Picard gets into the guts of Ensign Lynch and rips out that, whatever it is, transponder, transceiver, little mechanical thing. And that maybe ties into Jaws a bit. Jaws, there's a lot of kind of body parts and blood and kind of, as there would be. But there is a kind of a certain emphasis on that kind of, the sort of horror of the people being ripped apart, their insides being ripped out, the kind of, the horror, basically, the sort of horror movie side of it.
There is, and actually, I suppose it goes a little bit beyond that in terms of, because there's also that scene where you're wandering through, I want to call it the Borg workshop, where they're installing the parts on the different people, and you have an arm waving about, and you have someone's eye that's been replaced by a mechanical thing. It's not very bloody, and actually they do quite a good job to keep kind of red blood away. Not to talk about the undiscovered country and Klingons pink, Klingons pink blood, but he actually, again, is quite economic with that, while at the same time kind of freaking us out a little bit by preying on our body kind of fears and thinking, oh God, actually, what would it be like to have these cybernetic things implanted in us?
There is that shot. Aside from the opening shot of the drill going into the eye, which is kind of horrific, and I suppose sort of recalls that Salvador Dali film of the eye, the eye being slit.
Chien Andalou.
Yeah, so that kind of, just there's something so viscerally horrible about the idea of damaging someone's eyes like that. But then we get it again with the Borg. There's one in that scene that you're talking about. There's a Borg who the eye is shut, I think, but there's just the beginnings of some kind of Borgification of the eye socket with a little bit of kind of mechanical stuff on the eyelid, and that's quite sort of. There's something quite unpleasant about that. It looks like a sort of post-operative situation. There's something quite. It looks kind of painful and nasty, compared to often with the Borg. I think we see them after they've been transformed, and it's all quite sort of clean at that point. Whereas in First Contact, we have, and it's echoed in a way with Data when Data has his skin, because there's something about like the join between the mechanical and the skin that's slightly horrific. And there's another Borg towards the end of the film that you see kind of in the background that again looks slightly. There's something slightly kind of Frankensteinish about it, something kind of stitched together about it. It's not a kind of, it's not like it was in the TV show where it just, it was basically just a suit with some tubes sticking out of it. They made the effort to make it all, to make that kind of boundary between the machine and the organic feel a bit more troubled somehow. And you see it with the Queen as well, like those clamps that are pulling the skin down on her. That kind of interaction looks kind of slightly painful.
And then right at the end when obviously her skin dissolves, but Picard still breaks the neck of of her cybernetic kind of remnants. And again, that I suppose the kind of overall point aesthetically, which would key into films like Jaws, maybe for the body horror or a bit of gore, but also Aliens, Blade Runner, that kind of dirty sci-fi aesthetic, proper dystopia, which I don't think, again, Star Trek, traditionally speaking, is a bit more utopian and, as you said, a bit more clean. And I think in First Contact, in several ways, because they're doing it with the Borg, absolutely, and that's bringing the threat home a bit more than the TV show was ever able to do. Maybe certainly Next Gen Voyager kind of changed that a bit because they took on that aesthetic, I think.
But they sanitized it, I think. And one of the interesting things I was thinking watching Alice Krieger's performance in this, because, she played the same role in Voyager, but I don't think in Voyager she had the same... It didn't work as well because, they recast the part and it wasn't quite as good. And then they got her back and you thought, oh, well, it's going to be upping the game again. And again, it didn't quite work. And I wonder whether it is partly, there's something about the kind of oiliness of her. There's something about the kind of, she looks kind of sweaty and sort of wet. And do you know what I mean? There's something about her that she is kind of sexy in a certain way, but she's also kind of revolting in a certain way. And I don't think when they recreated the character on Voyager that they captured that at all. It all seemed much kind of cleaner and drier and more like it was on a soundstage somewhere, and it was kind of they'd lost that kind of grunginess of it somehow.
I think the other thing they did though in Voyager, that it was all green. Just from my memories of, let's say, Dark Frontier, Unimatrix Zero and Endgame, she's in that room and there's an awful lot of green. And I suppose there's two things to say, really. One is because you're on a Starfleet ship and you're in their engineering section, that I suppose we have the kind of traditional colour palette of a Starfleet ship, in which her skin looks kind of pale and you get the sweat and you get all of that, which I think would be diffused by a green light, even if they had done it, which I don't think they did. But even if they had wanted a dirtier aesthetic, I don't think they were going to get it. If they just made it it's really dark and green, whereas I actually think, bizarrely, there's a lot more light in that scene in First Contact, and that perhaps is something that lends itself towards her shininess.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I was just thinking in terms of just sort of going back to Jaws, I sort of wonder whether, because the other films on this list, it's kind of obvious why they were looked at. Jaws is kind of the odd one out. I can't help wondering if it's the fact of the shark and the fact that, you've got the character Quint in Jaws, who is, very much kind of Ahab character in the sense that Picard is an Ahab character. And yes, it's a shark and not a whale, but it's pretty much the same story. You go out in a boat and you try and kill this sea creature and it smashes everything to pieces and kills everyone. Or not quite everyone, but, kills a lot of people. So I sort of wonder whether that was the initial sort of impetus behind Frakes watching that film rather than these other things, but then at the same time these other things seem to be what he ended up taking from it in some ways. That's really interesting. I think the kind of grizzled veteran turned hunter on some kind of revenge mission, we do get a lot of that from Picard in First Contact. There's various moments where you think actually he's really on edge here. Again, that scene between him and Lily is fantastic and extremely well done. So that would make sense that you would want to look at that character maybe in more detail. And then indeed, actually, Patrick Stewart played Ahab. He did,
a few years after.
I think so, yes.
After. So I thought that was quite ironic. If only he'd done it before, that would have been maybe a bit more useful for Frakes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, maybe we should move on from Jaws to look at Close Encounters. Because Close Encounters, it's sort of easier to see. I mean, it's a classic, science fiction film, but it's, I suppose, my sense is that it maybe connects less to the stuff Brannon Braga and Ronald Moore, when they talked about writing this film, they called it the upstairs downstairs aspects of the film, that basically they had one story going on the ship and one down on the planet. I guess Close Encounters maybe ties in a lot more to the planet side story with Cochrane, and particularly the final scene is almost, I mean, it's not a rip-off, but it you can see the depth there to the final whatever it is, half an hour of Close Encounters,
Yeah.
with the way the aliens arrive,
Yeah.
with the way that's handled, with the sense, going back to this idea of awe and, this kind of Spielberg. People often talk about Spielberg as being quite kind of childlike, don't they? And he's often focused on children and this sort of childish wonder at things. And I suppose that's what you very much get in Close Encounters, is this kind of, it's very Star Trek in a sense. It's very kind of humanistic. It's very kind of open-hearted. It's not an alien invasion movie. It is people kind of coming forward, and linguists and musicians and all these people sort of trying to make sense of what's going on and try to sort of greet the unknown in that kind of quite benign way, I suppose.
I think that the way you can really see that kind of influence, and you're completely right about Spielberg's focus on children, like, again, E.T. being a really classic example of that. But actually even having child characters around, again, Jurassic Park, they're never far. They're never far. And even actually his Ready Player One that's coming out, I think, later this year is again another example of him actually kind of almost assuming the position of kind of certainly younger people. But that's good for an audience. It's really good in science fiction because we don't know what's going on and we don't understand everything, nor should we, because it's science fiction, and the imagination is kind of running. And so actually by giving it that childlike thing, then you're given license to imagine along with then all these other people and be awestruck, as opposed to assuming the position of a knowledgeable audience. That's quite difficult because audiences are increasingly more aware, I suppose, of what your kind of film making techniques and what you're deploying. But where you really see it as the ship descends, we've got huge cues coming from Close Encounters in terms of lighting, just on the crowd, but really it's the faces of the crowd. And Frakes takes a lot of time that isn't, if you had to talk about, is it necessary? Well, actually, maybe not. But actually, there it is. We get shots not just of the kind of overall crowd who are kind of looking up in awe, in wonder, but definite close-ups of individuals within this crowd, again reminiscent of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But also, we share that moment with them. What would it be like? And of course, like if Lily acts as a bridge for the audience thinking, what if I was beamed up onto the Enterprise suddenly and the Borg were everywhere? Well, now we're actually in the crowd with the people of Earth, and you start to imagine, what if the T-Planner hath just landed?
And it's the fact, I suppose it's the fact that they're extras. They're not, like you say, it's not focusing so much. I mean, it does focus obviously on Lily and Cochrane and so on, but the fact that they are these completely anonymous characters, they're basically, featured extras, that does enhance that in a way, because we know that they're not important people. They're just whoever happens to be around, the same way as we happen to be around sort of in the cinema. And they also do this thing, everyone in that scene does exactly the same thing that everyone does in Close Encounters, which is a sort of variant of the zoom to get the face shot, is they all step into a close-up. The ship comes down, the white light, exactly the same, like you said, the lighting is the same. You've got this bright white light, and everyone takes a step forward to bring themselves into a kind of closer framing in a way. And also, I suppose, symbolically, they're kind of embracing their future and they're kind of welcoming what's happening. They're not stepping back out of fear or whatever. There's this element of it. But again, it sort of ties in very much to this sense of wonder and awe, which in some ways, when you think about it, kind of is threaded through the film, though, because I think if you go right back to quite early on in the film, the stuff with the rocket and the way Picard reacts to the rocket, and he says to Data, I saw this in the Smithsonian a dozen times as a child or whatever. So it's taking him back to his childhood in a sense. It's taking him back in time to this kind of innocent experience in a sense. And he wants to have this tactile relationship with it, which of course ties into all the stuff that goes on with Data and skin and again the kind of physicality, but also ties into this kind of childish desire to, I mean, what he does there is kind of, it's not childish, but it's sort of, it's not enlightened intellectual Captain Picard territory. It's kind of quite basic and quite human, and saying, I want to touch this, I want to feel it, it's going to mean something. And then throughout the film, of course, we see the way that everyone interacts with Cochrane. You see the way Geordi talks to him, you see the way Reg Barclay talks to him. Yeah. They're all completely awestruck by him, even though he is not someone who deserves anyone's awe whatsoever. But they are all kind of reduced to this childish kind of infatuation almost with him. And, you know, the fact that we have Geordie talking about his school that he went to and everything, everyone seems to be sort of regressing in the presence of this kind of wonderful moment. And of course, in Star Trek's terms, it is a kind of childhood in itself, because this is the kind of pre-birth of the Federation. This is this kind of moment of, you know, humanity as this kind of child species growing up, in a sense. That's what First Contact represents, is this kind of moment, this sort of transition from, you know, us being this, what Q calls us in Encounter at Farpoint, a savage child race, to the sort of enlightened Star Trek that we know and love, with the Federation and with these kind of values.
Which is what I think, if you read interviews with them, it's what Moore and Braga were trying to do in terms of the stakes of the film. Well, the stakes were Star Trek. You know, like everything that we've come to as an audience, as a very loyal audience, everything we've come to admire and appreciate about these characters, about their values, about the Federation, about a kind of optimistic kind of view, a hopeful view for humanity's future. Well, actually, what's on the line in First Contact is all of that, because they go back and they've got to save it. Absolutely, you know?
Yeah, and they make that mean something. I think they do a very good job of setting up why it's important, which in some ways could be a challenge, because it's unusual in the sense that they're taking us into the past, but it's actually our future. Do you know what I mean? And yet they're building in this kind of nostalgia for the future, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Because they're not doing what they originally were quite keen on doing, was going back to the Renaissance and having everyone in tights. And they had this idea that there was something sort of appealing about the technology of the Borg versus this kind of, I suppose because the Renaissance represents a period of a degree of technicalization. I mean, if you think of Leonardo da Vinci and Voyager, for example, you've got that kind of element of the mechanics coming up. But at the same time, they decided not to do that. I think they thought maybe it would be a bit twee and it'd be a bit silly. And so they created almost a second Renaissance in the future, where this is the sort of socio-cultural, you know, this is the Renaissance of the sort of human spirit, in a sense, rather than of technology. And of course, I mean, our podcast is called Primitive Culture, and that is a quote from this film. This is the way that Deanna Troi refers to the place that they've come to. They've come to this primitive society, in a sense. But of course, what we're witnessing is the point at which it ceases to be that. It ceases to be a primitive culture. I mean, literally in terms of the Prime Directive, you know, they've got warp drive, they've got, you know, now the Vulcans are going to come and visit them. That's the kind of boundary point between, in Star Trek's terms, a primitive civilization and a kind of spacefaring civilization. But also just kind of culturally, this is humanity growing up in a way.
Yeah, because, well, as they say in the film again several times, this idea of there being a bigger world and there being, or I suppose a universe in this case, and uniting humanity in a way that no one thought possible, I think is the quote. And that's absolutely what we get. And I suppose with lines like that peppered throughout, you know, then you really do get a sense of how high the stakes are for our characters, and we do get then why they all feel this way about Cochrane, about the Phoenix, you know, all of these things that is, you're right, a challenge for the writers, because they created their own history, which is our future. That's caused them some trouble to think about how to do it, but at the same time, you know, I think they build it in very well.
They do,
personally.
Yeah. And I suppose they almost need to give it the same weight as, say, you know, in the real world, if it was D-Day and you know, the Borg interfered and D-Day went the wrong way or something, we could kind of relate to how that would have affected the last, you know, 70 years of our history, and it would kind of mean something. They kind of managed to build that in, not just by showing the Earth, you know, assimilated at the beginning, which obviously sets out the stakes in quite straightforward terms, but by kind of emphasizing what that sort of journey is that's going to be interrupted, in a sense, and what the stakes are on a more sort of philosophical level, I suppose. The other thing that struck me about Close Encounters is actually kind of interesting, is the ending of Close Encounters. There's two endings, right? Because I think there's a director's cut, and I know when we did our episode on The Wrath of Khan, we were talking about director's cuts.
I listened to that.
Did you? Right.
Yeah.
And Tony Robinson was saying that his least favourite director's cut was the Close Encounters one, because it shows you what happens inside the ship, which the original cut doesn't. And I thought that's kind of interesting, because actually Close Encounters, it very consciously in the theatrical cut ends on the Earth. It ends with the people left behind. So the ship goes off, it disappears, and we don't have access to that journey. We kind of are left to imagine it. And from looking at the outside of that ship, you can kind of imagine the wonders that are within it, but you're not going to see it. They've gone, they've left. And so what we're left with is a child, again, you know, saying goodbye, and the reaction of the crowd. And again, in First Contact, which I think is more surprising, given that this is a Star Trek story, it's a science fiction story, it's set in the future, it's set on the Enterprise. The final scene is not on the bridge of the Enterprise. There's the sort of penultimate scene is on the bridge of the Enterprise. And then the final scene is back on Earth, in not just Earth, but, you know, primitive Earth, watching the Enterprise leave from their perspective and then sort of sitting with them for a minute. And that is quite an unusual way of doing it. It's almost the same thing you get with the episode First Contact, where the whole thing is told from the perspective of the aliens, not from the perspective of the Starfleet crew.
That's the one where Riker and they're kind of altered,
yes,
aren't they? In
exactly.
The Next Generation,
and
the Mintarkans.
No, it's not that. No, that's a different one. That's Who Watches the Watchers.
Oh, yes,
it's another one where
yeah.
Riker is undercover, and they discover it, and it's all about how do they manage this because they kind of botched First Contact in a sense. It's a similar story, but again, it's told from the perspective very much of the aliens. Who are having a sort of alien invasion story in a sense, rather than from, you know, our perspective.
It is interesting, and what's really nice, again, if we talk about leaving stuff up to imagination, well, you know, your Trek audience, so maybe not mainstream cinema-going audiences, if any of those, you know, I mean, the film was a commercial success, so we tend to assume that not only Trekkies went and saw First Contact at the cinema, you know, but I suppose Spock is so culturally famous, and the idea of Vulcans and logic, you know, is so widespread that when we see those Vulcans sit down and sip tequila and then Cochrane, you know, pops on the jukebox, we can't see any of that dialogue. It's very physical and we're moving away from it, but we are left to imagine, my God, what must that have been? What must that have been like? That initial meeting. And then I suppose, I won't really comment on what Enterprise does with that, but
sure. Well, why don't let's move on from Spielberg to the next director that maybe would be worth thinking about is Ridley Scott. And interestingly, my understanding is Ridley Scott was offered this film before Frakes, because Frakes talks in some of the interviews about the fact that he knew he wasn't first choice for this film. They tried to sort of entice a kind of A-list director. I don't think they'd actually sent it to Spielberg, but I think he sort of implies at least that they'd sent it to Ridley Scott and also John McTiernan, interestingly, who did Die Hard, right?
Yeah.
Is that John McTiernan? Yeah. Which is interesting when you think of the Picard sort of iconography of Picard and his vest and everything. You can kind of see the logic there. And Ridley Scott certainly, you know, two films that I guess tie into this very much, Alien and then Blade Runner. We talked a little bit about Alien, but what did we talk a little bit more about Alien first, and then maybe we'll move on to Blade Runner?
That's it. That influence is really clear. I think if you were to be a little bit critical, and I actually think First Contact is a really nice length for a film, so I don't want to be too kind of critical in that sense, but I think the one thing that Alien does, and then of course maybe other audiences might find Alien too slow, but I think what it does masterfully is about an hour of build up and then an hour of hitting the fan. So, you know, like, and again, like I say, real economy of screen time. Alien is only seen for 4 minutes. I mean, I'm trying to think the first time we see it, it might only be, who's killed first? Brett? It's Brett, isn't it? And he's going, here, kitty, kitty, kitty. It's that scene. Yeah. Again, where incidentally he's very hot. Like there's a lot of humidity in that room. And again, anytime the alien's involved, there's a lot of humidity in the room. So that's something that I think the idea, I'm not sure it's in canon anywhere else that Borg ships are hot.
No, that's interesting. Yeah.
Like I really did, as far as I know, I'm racking my brains.
You don't get that sense, certainly in Best of Both Worlds, I don't think you get
in what's the first one? The Q.
Yeah. Q2.
Q2. Yeah, exactly. No.
Q-Who. Sorry.
Q-Who. Yeah, exactly. So you don't, and that would have been, you know, if they're exploring the ship for the first time, I figure we would have got the info.
Yeah, you're right.
Then,
you're right. Yeah.
So that's something they've added, and I don't have a huge problem with that at all. Indeed, Star Trek is always this evolving kind of pool of canon. So, but yes, the Borg ships weren't hot before that, as far as I can remember. Or afterwards.
No, and the other thing that they've added, which is not so much about, you might say it's more about aliens than Alien, but I found an interesting quote from Ron Moore where he says basically they tried to write the script initially with the Borg as they were in the TV show, as this collective, as this kind of faceless, leaderless, collective. And they felt it didn't work because they felt that they needed a villain, essentially. They needed someone that you could kind of understand, but also that you could hate and that you could want to be destroyed. And what he says is that, in Alien they had it because there was only one alien, whereas in Aliens the whole idea was, look, there's lots of aliens, but they still needed to have, he says they had to find a big mama eventually.
Exactly.
And that's the thing, is that, like, which is a kind of interesting way of thinking about the Alien film. So, like, yes, Aliens was like, yes, we build it all up, it's more. But at the same time, it doesn't work without one special alien. There's got to be one that is kind of the big alien, in a sense, that is the real threat behind it all. And in the same way, they sort of felt that this film wouldn't work if it was just loads of Borg running around and there wasn't one Borg that you could kind of interact with.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I completely agree. I think that certainly it's not just Star Trek films. I mean, films really run off this idea of having a primary antagonist, I suppose. And I mean, Star Trek does that incredibly well. That's what I think the strength of a lot of films. Khan, Kruge, and Chang.
Yeah.
Again, I think Star Trek 5 is a bit of a mess, and is the antagonist God or Cyborg? I'm not really sure, but
maybe that's part of the problem, in a sense.
Yeah, in a sense,
because what works, say, with Khan is a very a bit like the Borg Queen. It's kind of mad in a sense, but also quite comprehensive. You can understand where he's coming from. You can understand what he wants. It's all quite clearly laid out. He's not a sort of moustache twirling villain exactly. He's a very over the top villain, but at the same time he's a villain that is kind of psychologically grounded. Yeah, and I think with the Queen as well, you do get a sense that there is a logic to what she's doing. It does sort of make sense. She's very much on top of everything. She's got a plan. When things go wrong, she changes her. She even says we're changing the plan. She is an antagonist who is. There's a kind of game of chess going on. There's a kind of manoeuvring going on back and forth, just as there was with Khan.
Yeah, completely. And I think I agree with the creative decision. I think it probably divided fans at the time. Indeed, it might well still divide fans, having the Borg Queen and how that kind of works. I think if you refer to them as a sort of hive mind, which is done quite often, then of course bees work as a collective and have a queen. So, there is this... it does make some sense, and I think was therefore quite a clever invention. And you're right, she is psychologically grounded. Her motives might not always be totally clear, but I suppose she's running the show. I mean, that's it. I mean, and that's all you really need to know.
I suppose I was just thinking when you're saying you need a clear antagonist in a film, the exception to that probably is the zombie film, isn't it, in a sense? And of course, that's another big influence, which is not in any of this list of kind of classics, but I mean, it is kind of inescapable, the extent to which First Contact, and I think Lily even has a line where she calls them some kind of zombies.
Yeah, she does.
It's kind of explicitly in there. And the fact that they move quite slowly, the fact that they're kind of lumbering, there is the fact that they're basically reanimated dead bodies on one level because their humanity's kind of been destroyed. And also, I suppose, that kind of element of, the way, Picard shooting one of his own people, of the kind of mercy killing to try and prevent the assimilation. There's definitely that kind of zombie theme running through, and that kind of influence of the zombie movie as a kind of genre.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's not. What's so interesting about it is to. So if they wrote the script to have more of a primary antagonist and less of this idea of Borg running around en masse, and then of course we've discussed the fact that actually they only had about 7 suits, and so had to be quite economic with the way it was shot. Well, there's nothing about First Contact that I think is shot anything like a zombie film. I think it's approached. I think it's approached completely differently, almost at a distance in many respects, but with enough. Whereas the zombie kind of aesthetic really requires a bit more of a frenetic. Certainly from the camera point of view, traditionally this is, people can approach it in all sorts of ways, but this idea of being a bit more frenetic, maybe immersing the audience within a bit of chaos, because they're being overrun by hordes.
Right.
And actually what we have in First Contact is quite a controlled, measured, certainly aesthetically, that everything that's going on, I think, looks planned
Yeah.
Despite the so yes, there's a huge influence because of course the Borg are very zombie-like. But I think the reason that this list of films is the way it is then shown in the final product.
Right.
These are, Spielberg and Scott as two directors are extremely measured and controlled. They really
everything in its place and
everything is. And I'm trying to think now of more frenetic scenes, but they're just it's not done the way that, let's say, Romero's zombie films are done, and they've got their own aesthetic. So I'm not really making a judgment about it. I'm just saying that I think that they're approached very differently.
That's an interesting point. I guess the other genre that I've heard talked about in terms of this film is the kind of haunted house genre of films, like another kind of horror genre, which again you can see because the Enterprise very much becomes a haunted house. It's full of monsters. It's full of it becomes this sort of alien environment in a sense. But again, I don't. To be honest, no, I'm not familiar enough really with that as a film genre to appreciate the influence of that or not. But obviously we know that Brannon Braga, for example, is very interested in horror, is very interested in zombies. I mean, he's written zombie episodes elsewhere in Star Trek. And in that kind of, in bringing that into the kind of otherwise slightly sterile Star Trek universe, in a sense.
So I think, I'm trying to think what other episodes he's written, actually, off the top of my head.
Well, in Enterprise, he wrote the episode, that's what I was thinking of, where the Vulcans all turn into zombies.
Oh,
It's kind of like Event Horizon meets a sort of zombie movie.
Yeah, totally.
And they're fast zombies. They're like sort of 28 Days Later zombies rather than classic
slow zombies. I'm just trying to think if he did another great kind of Star Trek, I would say horror, but is Empok Nor.
Oh yeah.
I'm just trying to think.
I have a feeling that was Brian Fuller, wasn't it?
Is it Fuller, or I've got? I will find out.
But yes, definitely.
But yeah, that is like another
haunted house.
It is a totally haunted house. Here they turn up on this kind of decrepit version of their own station.
Yeah.
And yes, there are some psychotic Cardassians hanging around. You're completely right. Story by Brian Fuller.
Right. Okay.
So maybe not Brannon Braga, but yeah, this it is interesting. I think when you take on these other genres, and there must be a Voyager as well. There is the Voyager one where they're on a Malon freighter and something's haunting them.
Yes, I know what you mean.
The name of that one escapes me right now. But so you I think Star Trek has done it a few times. And I think again that's a bit more of a. I think that's about the space you're in, which again, I think Frakes does an excellent job of dealing with this in First Contact. Obviously in set dress and in production design, changing the Enterprise into the haunted house, but also not shooting too close. And I know that I've read some interviews with him where he's a bit annoyed about some moments in the film, certainly where they're doing the spacewalk, where he actually wanted to shoot longer. He thinks he did that with too many mid and close-up shots.
That's interesting.
He also said, and this is a more recent interview with the Hollywood Reporter, but he said that he thought that it would have been beautiful if J.J. Abrams had done it.
Well, that scene was pretty amazing at the time.
At the time,
like for Star Trek, that was a real technical accomplishment. That
yes,
scene,
it absolutely was.
Apparent weightlessness. They had and they had the spacesuits. I suppose you couldn't. Maybe the difficulty with shooting that wider is that you need to be able to see who's who, and it's quite difficult when they're all in those suits to get a sense of that.
And also, I suppose it's pacing as well, which again, the Abrams films and that kind of style lends itself more to. I suppose Discovery's doing this a little bit more as well. Lends itself to a more frenetic pace. And actually, that's the way that he shoots that space scene. I think is very again controlled. You're a little bit removed. You're not too far back, so you do know what's going on. But the cuts are slow. Everything's slow. I don't think that's a problem. But I think his own reflection on it is, well, God, couldn't that have been a great action set piece? Perhaps.
It's interesting. You're right. It does feel like everything slows down. I mean, I sort of take that to be to do with the experience of being in the suit. It's almost like if you go scuba diving, there's everything slows down underwater. And it sort of feels like everything slows down in space. And, the fact that even each step has to be more deliberate because it has to kind of magnetically clamp onto the deck. So everything becomes much more measured and slow. And in a way, you're right. It's strange for a kind of action set piece to be slowed down. But I don't know. I feel it works quite well.
No,
and the film I mean, it's a funny one because actually, I'd say like the opening, I don't know, half hour of First Contact is very frenetic. It's very fast paced. You know, it feels like there's a definite desire to get through the setup and into the bulk of the story extremely quickly. You know, they're out doing their thing in the neutral zone, then they're at Earth, then they're back in time, then they're this, then they're and then you know, and before you know it, the basic story has been kicked off. Even though there's quite a lot of setup has to be got through to get to that point.
Yeah, I think they go. So there's a couple of things. I think that I agree with you on that space, the spacewalk scene, and I think actually the tension in that scene is built from it being slow, like a frenetic shooting it, maybe a bit more J.J. Abrams style. Maybe people are running. Maybe there's some lens flare. Maybe you're cutting really fast. Okay. I'm thinking of the scene in the rebooted Star Trek where they're on that they're on the Romulan mining thing as it goes. They do the skydive, right? Stuff, so maybe we can compare these two scenes, and they're shot completely differently. And the tension in J.J. Abrams' version comes from the fact that you don't know what's going on, that you can't see because the cuts are fast. And you're getting a bit of point of view, and it just moves. But the tension in that spacewalk comes from the idea that they're trying to get this thing to work and it just won't work, you know, so they're moving chips around and they're pressing buttons and they're hoping to get access to then do a very manual thing. And it is very slow, but you get these nice kind of shots back to the Borg who aren't doing anything for a lot of that scene. And then they realize what they're trying to do and they attack. And
there's always that moment with the Borg where and there's a kind of sound cue that gets used over and over again in First Contact when a Borg wakes up, essentially. And I think that's always been quite an effective aspect of the Borg, you know, going back to the best of both worlds, that kind of the eeriness of the fact that they're kind of going about their thing, they ignore you until they consider you a threat. And then when they do consider you a threat, it's like, you know, all eyes are on you. And there's that kind of, it brings that kind of terror to it.
Which is done really well when they first, inside the ship, when they first get to the Borg. And suddenly they all come to life. That is very well, you know. Suddenly, oh my God, we've got to. Everyone's coming at me, you know. And then Worf starts whacking them with a phaser rifle.
There's something uncanny about it. I think is part of it, and the idea of this kind of automata that seem very mechanical, very inhuman. And maybe this would be the time to move on to talking about Blade Runner, because there are a lot of scenes in Blade Runner that kind of play on that, because you have the character of J.F. Sebastian who has this kind of collection of automata, and you have that scene towards the end where Deckard is going there looking for, is it Pris?
Yes, it is, yeah.
And she's pretending to be a kind of a mechanical toy, essentially. He's going around trying to work out, which is the sort of thoughtless, mindless mechanism, and which is the, you know, mechanical killing machine antagonist, and the kind of threat and tension that is present in that uncertainty is very, very much in some ways reminiscent of that kind of threat of the Borg. The fact that they're going about their business, the fact that they're ignoring you, almost builds up the threat more somehow, because you know that it's going to turn on its head at some point.
You get the payoff in sequences like that is the ability to use those let's call them background figures. I mean, they're not. They're part of the threat in a way, and they certainly build atmosphere. So in the Blade Runner scene, you've got him kind of trying to work out, like you say, which is which, and having some kind of investigation. And then once they do actually get into the fight, you've still got some cutaways back to these weird figures that were in the background, so you can use them again. What Frakes does in that initial sequence, every Borg that attacks them, well, we got a shot of them on the way in. So we were expecting, in a way we knew, I think the best example of that is the two that are up high. Yeah, so we get that shot that tells us there's two Borg up high, and then we think, oh yeah, so when this all goes wrong, which it's definitely going to, those Borg are going to jump down, which surely enough they do. And so you're setting it up by showing all these background figures, and then bringing those background figures to life as antagonists. And I think that's, again, it's a good way of building tension. The audience pretty much knows what's coming, but still you've introduced the threat cutaway at a time. You know, I think it's quite an interesting technique.
I think Blade Runner is a really interesting, for my money, of all the films on this list, this would be my top of my list if I was going to, watch one of them. Just, purely kind of visually, I think it's just a astonishingly interesting, visually interesting, dense, interesting film. But also I think it does have other links to First Contact that maybe are less obvious than some of the other films. I mean, kind of thematically, there's an obvious link with the eyes. Eyes being very important in Blade Runner. You have the eye of that glassy eye of the owl. You have the eyes, the man who creates eyes, and they go to see the eye, whatever he is, the sort of eye scientist, workshop, the workman who makes the eyes. In First Contact, you get. It opens with a shot of the eye of Picard's eye. Then we see this drill coming towards it. The eye is going to be kind of brutalized in a sense. And then, of course, we have Geordi gets his eyes instead of his visor, which is kind of interesting. So you get more eyes there. So there's definitely this kind of sense of the eye becomes, as it does in Discovery, actually, interestingly, becomes this kind of motif that keeps sort of cropping up one way or another. Interestingly, of course, in Blade Runner, the eyes are also the way that the replicants kill people. They kill them in this quite horrific way, very much like the first shot of First Contact, by sticking their thumbs through their eyes, which is, it's kind of unnecessary. They could snap their neck. They could do something more straightforward and less horrific. But there is something, going back to King Lear, about the idea of being blinded, of being attacked through your eyes, that is so viscerally sort of unbearable somehow.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. In fact, one of the worst examples of that is, the HBO show Deadwood.
I've never seen it, actually.
It is fantastic, so you would love it, but there is a horrific fight scene that involves someone's eye getting pulled out. Yeah. That's just vile. And you're right. So it's actually, I suppose, in both instances, in First Contact as in Blade Runner, it's preying on, I suppose, the audience's worst fears of like the bit of your body that you really don't want someone to go near.
That's the most vulnerable.
Yeah,
the most
completely.
Kind of,
and the most, it's sense, so you're being attacked, and it would be so visceral because, it's one of the 5 ways in which we kind of understand and interpret the world. And so I think cinema plays...
And for cinema, it's the most important.
Yes, of course. Absolutely.
Because it's essentially a visual. I mean, I know there's obviously and the sound. That the other reason I think Blade Runner is such a great film is the sound design is amazing.
Yeah, completely.
But it, the visual is the most important sense for cinema. It also probably, realistically, if you were being attacked, is the sense that you're going to use the most to protect yourself. Do you know what I mean? So there is that element of being kind of
blinded.
Being blinded and being. And that sort of being very compromising. I suppose the other element that strikes me as a comparison between those two films is this kind of noirish element, which we get with Picard and the Dixon Hill side of things, and the Dixon Hill Picard. And actually, the Dixon Hill scene in First Contact, I believe, is shot in the same location as the police station in Blade Runner, which is the train station in Los Angeles, and has some of that same architecture and some of that same sort of feel. And I think there's a kind of comparison as well with, Deckard in Blade Runner is this. He's a pretty awful character in some ways. I mean, so you kind of can't help watching it and thinking, is this guy the hero or is he kind of a villain? I mean, because there's something quite brutal about him. His job is is cruel. It's. And we get that with Picard with the Tommy gun gunning down the Borg, and Lily sort of saying, you were enjoying that. You killed one of your own crew members and you were relishing it, essentially. And in Blade Runner, there's that quite shocking scene where he kills the replicant that's working as a stripper, and she's basically in her underwear, and he's pursuing her through the street. Almost like, something we might come on to talk about is Terminator films. He's almost the Terminator in a sense, even though they're the robots and he's the human being. He is the cold, heartless, callous one. Apparently when Blade Runner was first screened, because there's this big issue about, the theatrical cut versus the director's cut, and most people think the director's cut is much better. It raises this question of whether Deckard is a replicant or not. It kind of has this interesting thematic stuff going on. Apparently the French audiences of Blade Runner, I read, took all of that from the theatrical cut just because they thought that metaphorically because the connection was being made, this is the real machine, this is the heartless machine, this is the kind of the monster in a sense, not these robot characters. The monster is the detective in a sense.
Yeah.
And I suppose you get some of that with Picard in his Dixon Hill persona, gunning down these Borg, giving into this kind of rage. And the way he screams in that scene, which is so un-Picard. And he can only do it because the sound is drowned out by the machine gun, basically.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Blade Runner is an interesting one. The different cuts are interesting. I think there is actually 6 or 7 versions that exist. The ones at the time for different international audiences were edited differently. So you actually had 3 different theatrical cuts at the time. And you're right, and I suppose the studio kind of invasion into Blade Runner was very much about possibly making Deckard kind of more likable. You know,
with the voiceover.
Yeah, with the voiceover.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of awful. They drive away into the countryside at the ending, which is was footage they took from The Shining. So I think that a lot of that was to kind of build him up into a nicer person, realizing that you're quite right. He's pretty brutal, and there's not much in him that's particularly redeemable in whichever cut you watch. I think, in a way, that's why I quite like him personally. But the Star Trek's a bit different because Picard, we know Picard already, or at least we think we do. You know, I mean, again, your Star Trek audience definitely does. And of course, First Contact being released at a time when it was all at its peak. You know, this was Star Trek's high season, so everyone had this notion of who he was, and so actually the writers were able to put this stuff in, you know, without having to do too much work around it. You didn't have to do within a whole film, and maybe that's why First Contact is able to do what it does in a shorter space of time. You know, other current blockbusters can't even do it with an extra hour. You know, on what First Contact's like an hour 40. You know, you don't have to do the full story of and I think he gets away with saying
you've got all the backstory.
You've got the backstory. And also,
it's the most famous episode of Next Gen.
That's
it's the one episode of Next Gen that everyone has seen, in a sense,
that's it.
because everyone remembers that cliffhanger.
Completely. In fact, actually, the Hollywood Reporter article I was reading on First Contact, another great Hollywood Reporter article they did was on what they think is TV's most famous cliffhanger.
Right,
And then that was The Next Generation's kind of best of both worlds, you know, because it was all around all the rumours about Patrick Stewart even leaving the show. And so people were really genuinely in that hiatus between thinking, well, what's going to happen when everyone comes back? And of course, the show didn't change that much.
And there's an interesting sense, I suppose, one of the things that's strange about First Contact is that we're seeing so many years down the line the repercussions of that experience. And that's not so they're not touched on in the show, because, you know, you do get the episode Family, you get the episode
Iborg.
Iborg, for example. So it is touched on, but it's not. It's surprising in First Contact because it comes back in such a visceral way. It comes back in such an uncontrolled rage, in a sense, compared to what we've seen previously of Picard kind of dealing with the trauma and you know, and it's saying Iborg, there's a kind of very Picard-like coldness. There's a kind of, it's hardened him, if you know what I mean. It's made him more callous in a sense as a result. Whereas what we see in this film is it's not that it's hard. It has hardened him in a sense. It's hardened him to not to listen to reason, not to, you know, there's no, well, it's interesting that, you know, if you think of what's the kind of quintessential Next Gen scene, it's the conference room. Everyone sits around the table and he listens to what everyone has to say. We don't get that. We get everyone trying to persuade him of something on the bridge and he tells them to piss off, basically. Then he goes into the conference room on his own to try and have a conference of one. And Lily comes in and kind of performs that role, and he has a hissy fit and screams and smashes everything. And, you know, and obviously, I mean, I don't mean to trivialise that scene. It's, you know, obviously that's the sort of dramatic core of the film, and it's an amazingly well put together scene. But it is interesting because it's the sort of, in the sense that movie Picard is kind of the antithesis of TV Picard, that scene is the kind of anti-conference scene that takes place in the conference lounge. Yeah,
completely. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. I mean, one interpretation of the kind of visceral reaction that he's having, bear in mind we start the film with a nightmare, and that nightmare leads quite directly to, and again, this is how the film operates on a kind of a pace that is just, I think, very brave, quite a bold thing to do, is to just get moving the way they do. No setup, no kind of cold open. You know, they just literally get going. And
he has that line, "Yes, I know, the Borg."
The Borg,
that's it. That's
exactly.
It. That's all the setup you
need. But then
basically.
Is his more visceral reaction, starting with that dream, triggered by their proximity? Although I suppose then, you know, he was with Aborg in Iborg and indeed near them again in Descent. But it's not the Queen. And
Maybe
it's the Queen who really had that effect on him, as you get that bit of exposition where he kind of says, oh, actually, I do remember you, and maybe it's the proximity of her again that kind of triggers him a bit more in that kind of post-traumatic stress way.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a reading of it. They leave a bit open to interpretation, which I think is always good in films, personally. But
I think the Queen is definitely an interesting character in terms of Blade Runner as well, because she has something in common with Batty, who's the kind of leader of the replicants in Blade Runner. Very charismatic, very intelligent. Interestingly, I mean, I'd say Batty compared to Deckard, Batty seems kind of almost humane. He seems he's not the brute. He's quite poetic. He's quite sort of thoughtful. He's quite he has the famous speech about these amazing things that he's seen. He's very into kind of philosophical issues in the way that Deckard is very kind of nuts and bolts and kind of getting the job done and all this sort of thing. And I think there's kind of an echo of that at the very end of the film with Data, the way that Data talks about the Queen after she's died. And he sort of mourns her death in the same way as Blade Runner, as a film, I think, mourns the death of the replicants. There's this kind of theme of mortality. There's the fact that at the very end, he doesn't actually die because Deckard succeeds. Deckard eventually loses, and then time runs out and he just sits down and dies. And the music in Blade Runner is very kind of melancholic, and it has that kind of sense of this sort of melancholy tragedy of these expiring beings, in a sense. And I think there is something of that in the death of the Queen, that, Data has this kind of real sense of regret that something special has been lost, even as she was the antagonist, even as she wanted to do awful things. But that there was something kind of about her that has gone now.
Yeah, I think...
Apart from when she comes back in Voyager.
Of course, yeah. Suddenly she's back and Susanna Thompson and Green. Yes, I think you're completely right. That there is, and that's down to, it's certainly down to scripting, but also down to performance. I thought Alice Krieger was really good. Good, very good in that role. Again, lots of stories about how she auditioned for it and kind of personally says she got a feel for the character as she got into it. She also appears in Deadwood and has a nice arc there, just a nice link. And yes, there is that sense at the end that we've lost, or that Data has lost. I suppose it's that the kind of bigger philosophical theme that the film's playing into is this search for perfection. And if we can say that kind of Star Trek is a bit utopian in its way of kind of perfecting, or rather projecting a perfect human image, like who are we and how can we better ourselves? And even Picard has that lovely line to Lily saying, actually the driving force now is not the acquisition of wealth, but the betterment of all humanity. In a way, the Queen has similar goals. She's looking for some kind of perfection. It's possible that in that sort of, again, Star Trek's classic theme of exploration, it's possible that the Queen doesn't know what that is either. It's not, because it sounds like they essentially just decided to start experimenting on themselves by fusing technology and the knowledge of all these different cultures. And it sounds like they haven't quite decided what perfection looks like either, apart from perhaps an omega particle in the Omega Directive. But I think there was that kind of synthesis between them all. Between the three, really, because Data had a thing for her, but really she had a thing for Picard. And there's that sense...
Sort of love triangle.
Yes, sort of very weird love triangle. Because, of course, Picard and Data have their relationship as well. And so, she wanted Picard, who wanted Data, and Data was...
There's a sort of weird Oedipal thing going on, possibly, as well, in the sense that, Picard is like a father to Data, and then she sort of leaves... She seems to sort of forsake the father for the son, somehow. Do you know what I mean? There's
completely.
There's definitely a lot of weird... tension in that dynamic between the three of them, and the fact that there's this kind of sexual element to it with Data and with Picard, implied by that flashback kind of scene where we see her
totally
up in his ear or whatever.
It
is interesting, and I think of course it's sort of trademark Brannon Braga not only to bring in the Borg. That when you're going to make an individual that's going to be the Queen, she's not the Queen up on a throne somewhere. She's this sexy, as kind of revolting and creepy and also quite terrifying as she is. There's that scene where she gets really angry and she sort of barks, and she's quite, scary lady. But she's also dripping with this kind of sexuality and sensuality, and that's her kind of route in with Data, is because she knows that she can offer him something in that respect. But it's very much this kind of sex and violence get kind of conflated into one thing. And I think when you look at Brannon Braga's work in Star Trek, there's often that kind of element of it. And you have it with 7 of 9, the Borg Babe. That's what they always called her, the Borg Babe. Yeah. And that is basically, Borg represents violence, the Babe represents sex. There's kind of, you mash those two things together, and that's where his kind of interests lie in some ways. Yeah. So it kind of, it sort of ties into all that, but it does also, thinking of Blade Runner, it ties into this idea of these, the female replicants are, one of them's a stripper, the other one is described as being a pleasure model or something. I think, she's basically a kind of prostitute robot in a sense. So there's very much this association between they're kind of sexy characters, but they're also dangerous. And there's this idea that the sexy woman is a kind of vampish thing, going back to the noir thing, the sexy woman who suddenly strangles you and tries to kill you or whatever, which is what we see in Blade Runner. And even, Pris, she does that kind of acrobatic routine and then clamps Deckard's head between her thighs in this kind of, again, a sort of conflation of sex and violence. She's going to kill him in this kind of distinctly sexy way. Interestingly, the way that she dies is echoed in First Contact, I think, because he shoots her and she has this kind of what looks like a fit, basically, as if kind of going back to Alien, same thing we get with the android in Alien, I think, when the mechanics go wrong, it's this kind of juddering, shaking, thrashing around. The machine is kind of out of control, like a motor that's, going wrong somehow. Yeah. And in First Contact, what happens is when the Queen dies, all the Borg experience the same thing. They all start fitting, basically. They all start sparking and crashing into things, and they don't disintegrate. They don't kind of just go to sleep or whatever, like we've seen before. They kind of have this sort of explosive fit, basically, as a response. And I think that definitely, is something that might have been influenced by that scene in Blade Runner and the kind of shock of that, because there's something quite alarming and distressing about it to watch.
Yeah, and I would actually say the same of the scene in Alien when Ash goes.
Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of.
That it was twist on twist at that point with that film, I think, and he obviously just goes mad and quite coolly and calmly tries to strangle her, but by the time tries to shove a magazine down her throat, but by the time he gets hit and then starts whirring around and going mad, and there's also the white liquid that goes everywhere, and it's quite, again, I think quite visceral and shocking in that regard. And I suppose certainly the one thing they did with the Borg Queen in her death at the end was the disintegrating skin that was an effects shot that really must have been a deliberate choice that I think works quite well, a deliberate choice to show that bit and then let the Borg carry the more mechanical, what you're
mechanical
expecting.
Failure.
Because of course they make the remark, we know that if you hit that tank, you're going to destroy the organic matter. Yeah. Like that's plot pointed really early on. That's what we want to do. Lots of shots of it in the background in every scene with Data. Definitely a few glances of him at that tank. Can I get to that tank? Yeah. So I think that's really interesting that they chose then to have her have, I suppose, a more organic death. She's the one who falls into the is it plasma and she or whatever it is, and she's the one whose skin
is flayed off.
It's flayed off. Yeah. Giving the Borg a human, I suppose it's the choice. They've given the Borg a human face or like a character, and she's kind of been present and is carrying that, and like all good villains needs to go properly as opposed to, I suppose if it had just been some kind of malfunction or if she'd just got phasered, it just wouldn't have felt anywhere near as satisfying.
But it's interesting, she has to be killed twice in a sense, because she has to, the physical has to disintegrate and then Picard snaps her neck basically, which again sort of ties into that kind of brutality of it. There is something quite brutal about that. There's also a kind of Shakespearean echo, I think, because it's this skull and you kind of have the, Patrick Stewart has this whole sort of Shakespearean thing. So obviously if you see Patrick Stewart picking up a skull and sort of looking at it, there's that's that sort of echo there. But I think the other thing, of course, is that the film or films that seem to me to be absent from this list that we've been going through, that is very strongly echoed in that shot, is the Terminator films, because what's inside the Borg Queen, and we only find out at the very end, because it's not what, the rest of the Borg are, they're cyborgs, they're organic beings with mechanical stuff on top. And the Borg Queen, when we first meet her, she seems to be a sort of organic. Well, we see her sort of her mechanical spine, don't we? But we haven't seen the inside. And in the same way as in the first Terminator film, you start off with the kind of fleshy Schwarzenegger, and then the flesh gets kind of ripped down until you're at the machine.
Yeah.
And the machine version that's inside the Terminator looks very much like the machine version that's inside the Queen.
I think that's a really interesting parallel. And of course, when you've got this idea of, there's a couple of things really. He's directing an action film, essentially. I mean, it's a bit difficult to call any Star Trek film a full action film, but I think First Contact is probably one of the ones that comes the closest. So he's directing an action film, and then both and the antagonists are robots or cyborgs, and that is essentially both Terminators. Yeah. Like, okay, here we go. So let's have a look at those films. Yeah, it is difficult to see if there's any other kind of similarities, but I think that moment and that choice of what the inside of the Queen looks like.
From a design perspective, it's clearly,
for sure.
Influenced. The other thing that struck me, though, and that this, I suppose, it might come down to the writing more, and I don't know if it's deliberate, but it struck me both the Terminator films end in factories, don't they? And there's this sense that the mechanical can only be destroyed by sort of being taken back to the forge, or back to this kind of workshop environment. And of course, First Contact it doesn't end on the bridge, it doesn't end on the hull, it ends in engineering, which is very much the same kind of thing. It comes down to the nuts and bolts, it comes down to the kind of the mechanical heart of the ship, in a sense. So that kind of is maybe one loose parallel between them.
I think that's a really fair and again, of course, actually a really good parallel that's only just occurred to me is that he does die in the second Terminator by falling into lava, essentially. And that's it. He can be melted back down. Yeah. It's a bit of an inverse, really, because of course that destroys his mechanical kind of properties. It destroys the machine, but of course what you've got in First Contact is something that destroys the organic matter
and preserves the machine.
Yeah.
Whereas that kind of molten, I suppose the molten metal or whatever, the lava or whatever it is the point at which the boundary between flesh and metal no longer exists.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because it will dissolve
course.
everything equally. It's so hard. Because normally, we think of flesh as being quite vulnerable, and when we see this again and again in First Contact, because Data has this flesh grafted onto him, he gets hurt and he kind of cowers in pain, which he's not used to experiencing. Whereas in his mechanical sense, Data can survive that plasma because he's just losing a bit of flesh off the outside. Although we don't get a sense of how unbelievably painful that must be for him, because we see how painful it is for him getting his arm cut slightly. Yeah. But he's just had his face flayed off at the end of that film.
Totally.
And we don't actually ever really dwell on that. He seems kind of fine next time we see him. He's in a sort of philosophical mode, but he's not in agonising pain.
I wonder if somewhere in between it all he was able to turn his emotion chip off.
Right,
that's
sense.
the only thing that you can think, because he's in that mist and then he comes out of the mist, grabs the Queen, takes her back down without the sense that he's injured in any way, shape or form, which I think is quite interesting. But there must have been a moment where he was able to regain control. Yeah. I mean, especially in order to do the things he does.
Well, there's a sort of interesting question, I suppose, with Data in First Contact, because the film wrong-foots the audience as much as, because I suppose what we discover in First Contact is that all those poker games that Data's been attending, he's picked something up because he's learned to be a really good bluffer. And you wouldn't think Data would be capable of bluffing the Borg Queen, but assuming that what he says to Picard is true, that he was only, it was only a fraction of a second that he was actually considering her offer for, he is playing, again, this idea of the kind of chess playing or whatever, like she's got a plan, she's working through it all. He is also working through quite an elaborate plan, because he's not, he could have not given up the codes to turn off the auto-destruct. He could have, do you know what I mean? There are other ways that he could have played it, and he's calculated it all to quite an elaborate degree. If you think through what's going on, he is playing her quite subtly and quite carefully.
And just also, I suppose, all of that to get near enough to that tank to shatter it.
Yeah.
That was the end game, which we assume may well have happened whether Picard got down there or not.
Yeah.
There's nothing to indicate that Data would have had to do anything different had Picard not been there. but that would have made for less drama. So,
Well, so it's interesting. So the Terminator films, as I say, are not on that list that's associated with it. I don't know whether I can't imagine that Jonathan Frakes hadn't seen them. Maybe they were too close because, as you say, they were about cyborgs and they were about maybe they didn't want to draw attention to that. Whereas it's sort of preferable to draw attention to Jaws, which people are like, oh, Jaws, what's Jaws got to do with First Contact? And then you can kind of see the borrowing, and it's a little bit more subtle in some ways. I'm just curious, are there any other films that it seems to you, I think you mentioned 2001, that there may have been an influence there. Are there any other films that you kind of think that you can see echoes of in First Contact that maybe we haven't really looked at or we haven't really thought about?
That's a big question. There's something about the Earth. I'm now sort of scrambling for some kind of reference here, but there's something about the way the humans are in those kind of camps.
Oh yeah,
and that kind of aesthetic that I really kind of wonder about that design, and it takes the mind to all sorts of places, more historical kind of grounded films. If we think about refugee camps, and if we think about this, I think that the Montana kind of compound is really dishevelled, and we know that wasn't a good period of Earth's fake history because it was shortly after World War III. But you can see that recovery, if it's been 10 years, well, that's been slow. And clearly people aren't prospering, and it's not, if this is Montana, this is
austerity Montana.
Yeah,
the
sure.
War,
yeah, exactly. Austerity Montana. And I think, again, where that aesthetic came from, I'm not quite sure, but you could point certainly to some historical examples. I think of
it's quite well done. I think the aesthetic of those scenes, if you think compared to Insurrection, for example, with the Baku village, which just looks like it looks like somewhere in California. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't. It's not a very believable set somehow. Whereas I think the set in First Contact, it does. You're right. It has a kind of element of. In Star Trek terms, it reminds me a little bit of, in the episode Ensign Rowe, we see the Bajoran, exactly the same sort of slightly sort of shantytown kind of refugee community. Interestingly, First Contact was originally called Resurrection and was going to be, and then they changed the name because the film Alien Resurrection came out. But the reason it was called Resurrection apparently is because there was a town downstairs, and Picard was going to be on the ground and Riker was going to be on the ship, and this is one of the things they changed. But the Picard story down on the ground was Picard and Lily, who was then called Ruby, in the town of Resurrection, Montana, and it was named after that town. So I'm kind of curious, and I think they had more about the sort of political setup at the time. They had, there is brief references in the film to the Eastern Coalition and the. When the Borg first attack, she says I can't remember what she calls them. We haven't seen them in years. The original version of the film would have kind of, I suppose, situated it more in that historical moment. Whereas what we get is kind of all stripped away. The war is just in the background. They're living this kind of basic existence, and really it's all just about this one event. It's about this one space flight that has to happen the next day, and really everything around that. There isn't really a world outside that encampment in Montana. We have no awareness of what's going on in the world more generally.
Yeah, which is, again, it's an interesting creative decision, but quite often, it's a funny one, isn't it? Quite often Star Trek does that because, and again, it's an economy of storytelling whereby you have a film here, or you have an episode, or maybe even if you're lucky, a two-parter, I'm thinking of that Deep Space Nine. In fact, actually, there's another place that the aesthetic I think has slightly come from. Past Tense.
Oh yeah,
the Deep Space Nine two-parter, which had come from a real story. The writers of that episode had heard about this idea of putting homeless people in a sort of sanctuary, and thought, oh my God, that's a horrible thing to do. That's a ghetto, and so wrote that episode. And again, we're transported into our fake history and the Bell riots and this very specific situation. But there isn't a world outside of LA. We're in the ghetto, or we're in the kind of posh bit that Dax is in, and we're not really anywhere else. And so the grander geopolitics
America or of
America
of the world,
or the world
Yeah.
are completely sidelined in favour of kind of quite specific storytelling. I suppose an example where that doesn't quite work, but again it does, is the classic City on the Edge of Forever, where you know, actually the geopolitics have to come into play because that's what changes the timeline.
But we're separated from it in a sense, in that it's not it's not actually taking place in the war, for example, which is what it's kind of ostensibly about. It's taking place how many years earlier. Yeah. So it's kind of in a bit of a bubble in itself, that episode. Yeah,
totally. And I think I'm just trying to think of examples that you know, I suppose, again, it's quite clever, but it's a Star Trek trope, is to take us to these other places and times that are either part of our own history or familiar enough to us, you know, not too far away from what we can imagine, and take us to those places and tell some really interesting stories that have a bit more of a profound kind of impact, but leave the rest of it up to us. I mean, because we don't know. I mean, even Khan's story is just never. If you think about the Wrath of Khan, if you even think about Space Seed, well, we get some of it, but we don't get much of it, you know. There's various books and comics that tell us a bit more, but that's all non-canon. You know, what's actually in those episodes is more about Khan as a person.
We just see a sort of hint of it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's interesting when you were talking about past tense. I suppose the difference between past tense and first contact, which they do have that kind of similarity, is the element of hope in First Contact, because past tense is very much the kind of classic Deep Space Nine. It's really grim and gritty and awful. And yes, these riots are I suppose there's a similarity. These riots are going to lead to something, and people are going to start questioning and so on. So there's a similarity there, that it's going to be this pivotal moment. And again, in the original draft for First Contact, Cochrane was going to be either dead or unconscious, I think. Unconscious, maybe. And Picard was going to have to fly the ship. So it was the same thing if the captain takes on this historical role and pretends to be, you know, whoever. But I suppose what's interesting and what gives First Contact its heart, and I think what makes it work as a film as well, is that it doesn't just have all this action. It is an action film. It's got all this action stuff, but it has got a real heart to it as well. And that is kind of what elevates it somehow. Yeah. It's not just a kind of romp with battling the Borg and all this kind of all this stuff. It's got real drama. It's got a real kind of character arc for Picard, and it's got this real heart of Star Trek in it, because as you said before, it is, you know, the stakes of the film are the Star Trek universe will or won't come into existence, and they they really sell that, and they manage to make that work in the scenes down below to kind of sell the importance of that and make you care about what happens.
Yeah, totally. And it's also, so we are in a bit of a bubble, but it doesn't really matter here because the stakes are high. You've got in a character in the characterization of Zefram Cochrane, not just the heart of the thing, but actually, you know, he's not this idealized, you know, put him on a pedestal kind of hero. He's actually a really flawed kind of normal human being. And then I suppose it becomes a story of the triumph of the human spirit and overcoming things, as opposed to actually, you know, Cochrane was always great, you know. And I think that you're right, there is a similarity, but a disparity as well between past tense and First Contact, where of course Deep Space Nine liked to be grim, and it was, and I don't know that tone ever does too well in the cinema. So I think they did a really good thing with First Contact by giving it a bit more, as you say, heart, and a bit more of an optimism that, again, by the fact it was a box office success and it can't just be Star Trek fans who were in the cinema, I think that attests to how well they did.
Well, thank you, Chris, for joining me to talk about First Contact today. It's been really interesting to hear some of your thoughts about some of those cinematic influences. Why don't you let our listeners know if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to contact you on Twitter or online? What's the best way for them to find you?
Twitter at Nunn, Nunn, the less.
Thank you. Well, talking about cinematic influences on First Contact isn't the only thing we've been doing this week. So here's a listen to what else you might have missed out on the Trek FM network.
Previously on Trek.fm, Literary Treks.
But let's start with that first one, that Siege in Superspace. So, oh boy. Superspace, I don't know, is this better than subspace? Is it?
Well,
I think it is. The thing I really love about this issue is we haven't had many stories at all about super space.
The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Right. So, okay, they're under orders. They're not supposed to talk about it, and that's how you maintain the continuity that Kirk and Spock are surprised that there's a mirror universe. I mean, that works. That makes sense. But these people were there. They know that there's doppelgangers there because they know that because Cadet Tilly became Captain Killy, right? They know this.
To the journey!
There was a lot of face melting in this episode. You're right.
Everyone's melting. What a world! What a world! It was, and everybody was slimy looking. Why were they so sweaty? Why?
7 of 9 had this full-on Borg Queen look about her.
She did, and who else was really sweaty looking? Besides 7.
Neelix was really sweaty looking. I thought
he was.
And he had kind of a silver tone. He had the silver blood.
He did. Like, he was distinguished. Distinguished melting Neelix.
Yes. Yeah, he got a buff and polish.
The 602 Club.
No, I mean, it was really all we had was like animated shows. Like you had like the animated Batman series, the animated Superman series, and as far as the big screen went, it was not so great. I mean, you had Blade. Blade was... Some people cite Blade as kind of the precursor for the superhero genre picking back up, but it was very much kind of a genre film. I know technically it is a comic book film. I don't know if I'd count it in the realm of like big budget superhero movies.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all of these shows and join in the conversation about your favourite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad, or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please do leave us a star rating and a written review at the same time. If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play Music, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link. If you'd also like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM, that's patreon.com/TrekFM, to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more, available through our special patrons website, the Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month, so we really appreciate any support you can give us, and we hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM. Duncan and I would love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to get involved and do just that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, B-A-B-E-L, into the search field on Facebook, and it should come right up. If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can find Duncan and I on the Babel Conference as well, and you can find us both on Twitter, Duncan at Barrett's Books, and myself, Tony, at Black Hole Media. And you can also find me hosting my own podcast, the Xcast and X-Files podcast, if you type that into Twitter and Facebook. So thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Primitive Culture. We'll be back soon to discuss more history, culture, and how Star Trek relates to it.
You're blended already.